Hey everybody, I've got a great video for you today because we are taking a detailed POV look at the best value in the classic car world, the most underappreciated, the most undervalued collector's vehicle you can buy, the Mercedes W114 and W115 from the late 60s and early 1970s. You see, when it comes to collector German cars from this period, vehicles like the BMW 2002s exploded in value, the Pagoda Mercedes SLs exploded in value, but these little coupes and sedans can still be had for pennies compared to some of the more highly appreciated cars of this era. This is my personal car. I purchased it for $12,000 6 months ago, and I want to take you on a detailed tour of the outside, the inside, and then we're going to get it on the road and show you what it's like to drive one of these Mercedes, because it is one of the most special experiences of any classic vehicle. Now, these cars were produced from 1968 through 1976, and this is the smaller of the two Mercedes sedans available during that period. So the 108s, they were the large ones, more comparable to the S-Class of today, and then these were the E-Class. Now, the W114 and the W115 were available in a couple different configurations. The sedan, it's going to be the most popular vehicle you find of this segment. They sold 1,852,000 of these cars during that, 8-year run, which is just mind-boggling. But if you want a coupe like this car, these are far more rare. They sold just 67,000 of these examples. So these ones are going to fetch a little bit higher value, but still super affordable. Now, this is a Paul Brock design, and it's just stunning. Iconic 3-box silhouette, and the coupe varies from the sedan in a couple of different ways. Now, obviously, 2 doors instead of 4, but the actual roof line is 1.8 inches lower. The trunk has been extended by quite a bit, and the total trunk volume right around 1.5 cubic feet larger. Now, when you're looking at these cars, the sedans found here in the US will typically be found with diesel engines. So the 220 diesel, the 240 diesel, and the 300 diesel. The coupes like this car, well, these are powered by gasoline engines. And if we look at the badge on the back, you can see this one says 250C. Now, by common logic, you'd expect it to be a 2.5 liter, and the C stands for coupe, but it's actually a 2.8 liter. There was also a 280 version of this car, and if you see one that has an E after the C, that means it's injected. Now, the 2.8 liter was also a 2.8 liter, so both the 250 and the 280 had the same displacement, but very different engines. So the 250 used an engine internally known as the M130. Inline 6-cylinder engine, and it's what they refer to as a mid-6. So this engine made its debut in 1951. It evolved over the years, but it's a very basic single overhead cam durable engine. The 280 cars used an engine called the M110, much more advanced. The reason I bought this particular car is these two bad boys right here. So you can get this car in both carbureted and injected form. Once again, that E means it's injected. Now, I prefer the carburetors. Originally, this car would have had twin Zenith carburetors on it. It's been swapped to Weber's because, well, to be honest, here in the US, finding people to work on Weber's, finding replacement parts is much easier. Now, the purists will tell you that the engines run much better when they are on their original Zenith carburetors. I had these tuned up to run pretty darn well. So this straight 6 is an absolute peach. You'll see when you get it on the road, it runs beautifully. This car in general is a really well-kept survivor. I believe I'm the 4th owner, and there's not been a lot of restoration work done to it, just a tremendous amount of preservation. So the base price of this car in the early 1970s, $6,300 or so, $6,500. Now, to put that into perspective, a Cadillac Eldorado, a Lincoln Continental Coupe, the Mark series of the same era, would have started in the $7,000 range, but with Mercedes, everything was an option. And these quickly grew to the $8,000 mark, and then you ended up with a car that was far more expensive than some of the Lincoln and Mercedes competition. and offered far fewer features. But where Mercedes gave you that the American competition didn't was build quality. So this is a very different thinking than Mercedes of today. Mercedes of today, they're still high quality, but there's a huge focus toward technology, state-of-the-art features, state-of-the-art design. Mercedes of this era was a car that you purchased and you kept for decades, and then you passed down through the generations. These are cars that were not by any means the best equipped vehicles on the road, but were built to last longer than the 50 to 100,000 mile mark, which was pretty standard from a lot of American cars in the 1970s and 60s. All right, let's check out the trunk. Positively enormous trunk. There you can see all my service records and manuals. Full-size spare tire, of course, and it just goes farther into the cabin. It's a really extremely impressive and extremely large trunk. But enough of my chit-chat. I think it's time that we get this car on the road and experience the best part of one of these old Mercedes, which is the driving experience. So big, heavy doors. One of the coolest parts about the coupe is it's actually a pillarless design. So when you put down the front and the rear window, you end up with this cavernous space with no B-pillar, and it's a beautiful, distinctive look. I could just keep jabbing about this car forever, but this is the best angle. Rear 3/4 on a 250 280C is really the angle, which is cool. You get to accentuate that low roofline from that angle. But the doors, thick pieces of steel. The door close sound, absolute perfection. Listen to that again. Yeah, just incredible. Now the interior of this car, a couple of different materials were offered. This one is what they refer to as MB Tex. I refer to it as military-grade vinyl. MB Tex will outlast all of humanity. It is one of the most durable materials on the planet. And it's a really nice color combination, this car. So we've got a horizon blue, a super light, fine baby blue exterior, and then this dark blue MB Tex interior. And let me show you the key. It's got a very distinctive key. It's got that little hole there in the center. Instantly, when you step inside this vehicle, you are greeted by one of the most impressive steering wheels ever fitted to a production vehicle. Now, this is the same steering wheel they used in vehicles like the legendary Pagoda SL, and in '73, they changed the steering wheel to be a little bit more conventional, but I actually wanted to find an ivory version of the steering wheel because I think it's beautiful, and they are shockingly expensive. We'll talk about some of the cost of what this car has taken to run over the last 6 months in a section here in a little bit, but beautiful steering wheel, very intricate, very elegant, and it's just a huge diameter. So let's go ahead and start this car up. So, key in the ignition, give it a couple twists, and just like that, that 2.8 glides into life. Beautiful idle. There we go. Clear the carbs. Oh, it's running beautifully. Really is running nicely. Now the seatbelts in this car, a little bit intricate. So first off, you've got this bottom portion, which clips in place. Now you've got a lap belt, and then you reach behind you and grab the top portion, which is actually your shoulder belt, and that is manually adjustable, non-retractable, and then tighten that up, and now you've got 3 pointed seat belts. And that was one of the big deals about the Mercedes of this era, was their emphasis on safety. So even when this car debuted in 1968, it was one of the first production vehicles to feature crumple zones. So in the event of an accident, the force of an accident would be absorbed by the unibody and not by the passengers. And that's one of the things I love about them is they're very daily drivable, and you don't feel as vulnerable as something like Volkswagen Beetle, right? Where you got little thin doors, really rudimentary body construction. But let's merge onto the main road here. We'll talk about that engine. 2.8 liters straight six, single overhead cam. We'll give it some accelerator. Revs out beautifully. 4-speed automatic transmission. There's 55. And there is 60 there, not giving it all the beans, but 0 to 60, according to Road and Track back in the day, 13.6 seconds. So by modern standards, it is not a super quick car, but it is more than enough to keep up with modern day traffic. That's another great thing, is if you do get a gasoline variant of this chassis, plenty of power. 157 horsepower, 181 pound-feet of torque was the official brake horsepower number back in 1972, and more than enough power even to go highway speeds. Now, One thing which is worth noting, this 4-speed is geared extremely short, extremely short. So we're cruising here at 60 miles an hour. I did have a tach on this car for a while, and 60 miles an hour, you're turning close to 3,500 RPM. If you increase that to 70, 75, you're going to be touching 4,000, 4,500 RPM, and that engine is screaming. So if you have a long distance to drive on an interstate, at American interstate speeds, the engine will handle it. I'm not saying you're going to blow the engine, but it is screaming pretty good. It is a little bit alarming how fast this engine spins, and that's due to the gearing in this car. So first gear, over like that. The transmission tries its hardest to get into second gear almost immediately, and then you really drive in third and fourth. Even at speeds of 35, 40 miles an hour, it'll try to upshift into fourth. You know, do I want a manual transmission in a vehicle like this? Not really. This car weighs 3,600 pounds or thereabouts, and yes, it's got plenty of power. Yes, the chassis is beautiful, which we'll talk about, but it's not a car you really want to go rowing your own gears in. This is a cruiser. This is a car that you want to be wafted in silence, and at constant, continuous speeds like we're doing here. The best way I can describe the thrum of that straight six and the quietness and the serenity from the suspension is aircraft-like. It's like you were sitting in a first-class seat on a Boeing 737 at 37,000 feet. It just glides its way down into the horizon. Now let's see how it is in some more twisty mountain roads. The way that Mercedes dialed the suspension in back in the day is truly remarkable. It has genuinely one of the best rides of any car I have ever experienced. It irons out bumps. It's not floaty. It's not floaty like an Eldorado or a Lincoln back in the day, but it's never crashy. It's never upset by potholes or by large imperfections in the road. Now, it could be down to the small wheel size. This car does have later 123 wheels, but even still, I think it's a 14-inch wheel on this car, maybe a 15, and a really thick sidewall. And when you put a thick sidewall on the car, you let the tire do a lot of the shock absorption, and you don't rely so much on the suspension. And modern cars have completely gone away from that formula, which is a huge shame. And genuinely, I mean, it's amazing. And you can take corners pretty quick, right? Like, it will hug the road. It's not trying to skid off into the bushes. It's a much finer handling car than an Eldorado or a Lincoln, you know, a land barge like that from the American cars in the day. You're never going to get sick on a twisty road on this car, but it's not a car you really want to push either. It's very slow steering, power assisted. It's actually got really good feedback, but you really got to turn the wheel a lot, especially in some of the tighter turns. It's the car not really intended for super quick slaloms and autocrossing. It's a car designed to get you from point A to B in the most comfort and the most serenity possible. And boy, does it do that. The seats are actually phenomenal. So in my previous Mercedes, I had a 123, and I've had a couple others. And the 123 MB Tech seats I found to be very lumpy and very uncomfortable, but these seats, very soft and almost supportive actually. Actually, I got a pretty good amount of back support. Here we go, we got some turns. Transmission holding fourth gear. This engine will rev to 6,000 RPM or thereabouts, but it's happiest in the lower revs, just a big wallop of torque as you accelerate up the road. Transmission does a good job of holding gears. It's actually a pretty good transmission, even by modern day standards, at keeping you right where you want to be. Seats fantastic, steering fantastic. It's just a great car. Now, some things that are not so great, fuel economy is pretty dismal. So Road and Track got 16 mpg back in the day, and I think that is spot on. I typically average, depending on the city highway mix, between 15 and maybe 17 on a good day. If you're doing a lot of city driving, 14 is about typical, and that's just one of the drawbacks of the Mercedes carbureted straight six. Another drawback, and just about every straight six owner of these cars will tell you, is that they tend to run hot. They don't overheat, but they are on the upper end of the temperature spectrum. You know, there's other drawbacks, like they do rust. This is not a car I'd want to drive in the winter in the salt belt because it will rust out. And parts are pretty expensive. So this steering wheel, I found this one, it came out of Hungary, excuse me, came out of Hungary, 680 bucks shipped. And if you want a nice one that doesn't have grazing, $2,000 to $2,400. It is an expensive wheel. I just had the gauge cluster rebuilt, $300. That was pretty good. I love the way it came out, more or less. The guy said he fixed the clock and it's still not working, and it's kind of a bummer. But a lot of like the little components on these cars really add up, and there's some weird things. Like, you'd expect the interior on this car to be the same from the coupe to the sedan, but stuff like this speaker grate is actually different. The sedan had a little elevated speaker grate. The coupe had a metal one, which was covered in like a leather or vinyl. Yeah, so this car actually was sold new in California, and then transitioned to Washington, and then the previous owner brought it to Colorado, and I bought it from him. But of course, right before we were about to enter one of the worst winters in Colorado history. So over the last 6 months, I've put 4,000 miles on it. Nothing is broken. I had to redo the carbs, had to get the throttle linkage adjusted so it ran really nice, put the new steering wheel on it, new gauge cluster in it, fix that little speaker grate, and I'm probably in it now 14.5, something like that, which is pennies for the driving experience. It really is for what you get compared to like a Mustang that you could pick up for $15,000. It's pretty incredible, the value here. All right, well, sorry about that. The camera overheated, which is a little bit of a bummer. Funny how the old Mercedes is more reliable than a camera, but let's just conclude this up. As always, it's been Tommy with Everything TFL. We'll see you on the next video.